Hello and welcome to Postgres FM, a weekly show about all things PostgreSQL. I am Michael, founder of PG Mustard. I'm joined as always by Nick, founder of Postgres AI. Hey, Nick.
Hello, Michael.
And we have a special guest, Fabrízio Mello, who is owner of Timbira, software engineer at PlanetScale, and creator of PG Statlog, which is a new extension that we're going to be talking about today. Welcome, Fabrízio.
Hey, Michael.
We're really glad you could join us. So, PG Statlog, do you want to give us a little bit of what it is and why you started work on it?
PG Statlog is it's a Postgres extension that solves actually at least try to solve a very tricky problem on Postgres observability, that is collect information about your logs in several different ways. For example, currently you need to check your logs for some error. For example, your application is erroring out for some reason and you need to check what the error is happening after some deploy or something. You need to go search the logs, grab the logs, and depending on where your host is running, it can be even tricky, right? Because you have managed service, containers, and all of different environments running Postgres. So you can have a bunch of different ways to go to the logs and look for some. And pgstats log is essentially a view. It's a pgstat view inside Postgres that you collect counters, collect information about what is happening in your log. It is grouped by backend types, user ID, database ID, SQL, error code, and error level. And you can configure pgstat-log to collect different error levels depending on how much information you want to print those counters. So essentially, a brief introduction is this. So make your life easier. Instead of you go to jump into weird tools to access log, you have all the information you need, at least the basic information, inside your Postgres. Then you can attach some monitoring tool and collect this information and, for example, see over the time error ratio based on a specific application, for example, if you collect information for a given user.
So I agree with you. This is a big gap in Postgres observability, that we cannot understand error rates beyond a couple of things. There is a rollback counter, like transaction, exact commit, exact rollback, two counters in PGStat database. But what if it's some other error happened, right? And also, what kind of error? Is it just like uniqueness violation or it's corruption? Like codes, there are three codes for like most painful codes: XX000, XX001, XX002. You mentioned error codes, so there is a registry of error codes, but it's not possible to monitor them other than like just go into logs. But logs, I agree with you, it's hard to reach them often, but also they contain sometimes personal data. This PII, for example, our stack for Postgres AI, companies come to us to analyze health of database, and we don't deal with logs directly, never, because we don't want to tell them we deal with PII, because everything we deal with is just metadata, some counters, and we want error rates like that, right? Grouped by, as you mentioned, by multiple things. For me, most interesting is error codes. I want to know exactly, like in past month, did we have any XX codes in this database or no? It's not possible to answer. It's insane that it's not possible to answer, right? There's another thing which is not possible to answer. It's queries per second. Not possible to answer. You can extract it from PGStat database, but it's maybe not the whole iceberg, right? Yeah, but it's a different story. I'm also thinking why nobody is attacking this missing piece. But that's great. So you built this extension, and first question, you mentioned all these things to group by. Why there is no query ID there?
I think just because I didn't add it yet. Maybe for the next version we can introduce a query ID. We are jumbling the query and providing the query ID, we can collect and store that as a new key for this.
Because I want to know which, for example, which queries had these errors, right?
That makes sense. Makes sense.
Maybe it's expensive in terms of overhead. We can discuss overhead slightly later, maybe, because it's a big topic. But another question I had, why did you call it pgstat.log, not pgstat.errors or something?
Because we can collect normal log messages as well. So I created this configuration, mean error level, that you can define what is the minimal error level you want to collect.
Not only error, but also warnings and notices, like
everything. You can collect everything. The default is error, the mean error level is error, but you can define any error level. Even the bug.
I think default is warning.
Oh, default is warning, sorry. Yeah.
Which is the same as, you had a really good caveat section in the README. And you mentioned about logmin messages as well, which also defaults to warning. So by default, both match, which is nice. But if you want more than warnings, you also need to change that, because otherwise they don't end up in the logs in the first place and you're using that hook. I think it's really cool for all the reasons Nick mentioned, but also potentially for more. I feel like there's probably quite a few things that are warnings in the logs that probably a lot of maybe managed service users or maybe users in general just don't ever notice because they don't think to look in the logs for warnings. So I think exposing those via some monitoring tools or other tools could be really useful as well. Just show you do have warnings going on in your logs, by the way.
Let's name the core of the problem, the root of the problem. There are, like, all SREs know methodologies like use, right? Brandon Gregg views and foregone signals. We cannot apply them to Postgres right now without digging the logs all the time. And this is insane that you cannot apply basic methodologies, because all of them include question, do we have a spike of errors, right? We cannot answer. Let's go grab logs and answer. It's an insane situation, which means that demand in this tool is huge. Everyone needs it.
Yeah, you can get rid of some complex stack like logs dash.
Yeah, exactly.
Kibana, and just have your simple view and Postgres exporter or something collecting time-to-time information from this view and send out to somewhere to GraphQL something.
Exactly. Like you can analyze it inside the database. I saw a weird extension.
Using our tool, your PG hash.
Yeah, like that, like just self-collecting samples and understand like buckets and so on, like it's possible. But also because of lacking this observability piece, I saw long ago, like RDS had it as well, extensions like foreign data wrappers over logs just to bring this visibility about errors and something to SQL context, which is like absolutely crazy thing. So yeah, that's great. And it's great to have it, but everywhere we discussed it so far, and this podcast won't be an exclusion, I say this must be, I'm not asking, I'm just saying, this must be in core.
Yeah, this is what I was about to ask you. Why do you think this should be in core? Truly in core, not as an extension? Because my plan right now is pack this as a contribute module and send it to upstream. I didn't do it yet just for time reason.
Like pgstat statements.
Right.
Yeah, like pgstat statement. Like pgstat statement.
That's great. I think this is absolute minimum that needs to be done. But I also think pgstat statements should be in core to avoid this friction of create extension. And this should be in core just because, again, any serious methodology includes error analysis. And it's not available without digging logs. And digging logs is not always possible because it has a PII and not all people have access to it. Not all external people or internal people, sometimes they don't have access because there is PII, like emails or something, right? We just don't need to know basic thing like error rates. Without building this stack with Kibana or something. I never saw it working really well. So many companies built this, but the only thing I saw was working quite well was Splunk, which costs millions of
Plan.
dollars. Yes, Splunk costs millions of dollars and requires a whole team to manage additionally. It's a great piece of software, super expensive. I don't see any startup that could afford it actually in terms of money and people allocated to manage it. So it should be
Yeah.
simple. Like error analysis must be simple. That's why it must be in core, available to everyone.
And you know that talking about simplicity, this extension was something that I wanted to work for a long time. And main reason I didn't start it many years ago was because, I need to build an entire PG stat statement like extension with serializing the information to somewhere in the database, deserialize this information and all of those stuff. It's a lot of work, right? And then I always have something else to do, and I never do. Then this new feature Postgres released on PG18, custom cumulative statistics. That is great because open the doors for the extension authors to create their own statistics like stuff. And then the statistics collected of Postgres, you do the job to collect your statistics. So it abstract a lot of complexity of dealing with a lot of in-memory stuff, serializing, deserializing stuff. On Postgres and on the extension side, we need to deal only with the business logic of the thing, what you want to collect, right? So this is one of the reasons that I started. The second reason is, okay, I need to try more AI tools because I'm old guy trying new AI stuff, and then I tried it. And the third reason because Nik liked it very much and pushed me a bit. Okay, we need to do this. We need to have this in core. So let's do this then. And then I bootstrapped the first version, and then Nik helped me using AI tools, reviewing, testing, and all of corner case. So now we have a good state of code that is good enough to send to upstream like a contribute model like or something. Those are one of the reasons that I decided to do this right now. It means that this extension won't work, for example, with PG17, 16, only on PG18 and next versions.
Nice.
Right.
I saw you already added 19 support as well. Was that much additional work, or was that relatively straightforward in the end?
I think it was only one macro, only one small piece of code. It's just one commit to make it work. The most part of the extension is the same because some internal data structures was remaining or moving around, and then I just used a macro to make it compatible either on 18 and 19. Even on main Postgres branch is compatible right now.
Nice. Perfect.
For the 20 development cycle.
That's good. Let's talk about a little bit about overhead and observer effect and what's the price of having all those counters.
I did some very basic benchmarks. The overhead I saw setting the mean error level to log everything and running some PG bench synthetic workload, I knocks around 2 to 3% of overhead.
What was QPS and how many log messages per second register? Do you remember?
I think I have this information ish.
Yeah, I'm very curious. I'm maybe I want to dig myself. I just need to find time, which is hard lately. Yeah, I would like to scrutinize it.
Just to be clear, though, the default here is warning, and we're all saying that it would be useful at warning or even error. It would still be extremely useful. So presumably at those levels, it's going to be near zero overhead.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I tested on the worst case scenario.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the worst case scenario, logging everything and then collecting everything. And then now I discovered something that I'm working on, because we need to configure the capacity of how many lines we collect, how many entries we collect in this pgstat log, like pgstat statement.
In pgstat statements, it's 5,000 by default. Pgstat statements .max.
Yeah, exactly. And then a new different entry came. I'm not doing all the one algorithm, and this make expensive. I have one entry that should be discarded, should be dropped and not collected because my list is full. My list of entries that I'm collecting right now is full. So this, I think Nik advised me to create this dropped information on the pgstat log info to see how many messages was not collected. And when we reach to this point, then the performance is even worse. The overhead is like 27% or 30%. So I'm reworking the main algorithm to don't be so expensive.
Right. We talk about overhead here on an edge case when it's basically it's stress load, when we have a lot of log messages happening. And it's worth noticing that these messages go to logs as well, right? If we have so
Yes.
many log messages, we have observer effect there anyway, right?
Yes, you have problem anyway because your log is.
All queries, this is simple. Let's set a log statement all, and let's go. This is how you can put your server down if it's loaded. So it means that overhead you introduce is like sister or brother overhead of we already have in logs. We're just slightly amplifying it, right? And amplifying not badly, because overhead from writing to disk is high. If you write 1,000 lines per second through logging collector, you will notice this. And I know it, you will notice it. If you increment some counter 1,000 times per second, you also probably will notice it, but less, right? So we should log less. This should be a rule, right? And exploring overhead on edge case makes sense just to understand like how much is. Maybe we should explore with flame graphs as well in normal conditions, like how much is go into these functions. Also, contention risks. Obviously, you have some lightweight lock introduced, right?
Yes, I have some lightweight lock introduced. But the good news is that this is processed by a stats collector, because it's done on the stats collector side. But anyway, it's in the hot path of the emit log hook, so it creates contention. But mostly CPU contention. Not memory contention, it's not too much, but it's more CPU contention. It's not this contention because we are not writing anything on the extension. It's done on the stats collector when you shut down the server and start the server, because this is done by another subsystem, not in the extension itself. We have a new abstraction that custom cumulative statistics created that is great for extension developers.
Yeah, that's important. So it means like a safe restart, like not a crash. The stats will persist.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on crash, it would be lost, which makes sense.
Yes. It behaves like pgstat did.
I think also granularity matters, right? Because if you have only some limited number of aggregated entries, right? So aggregate by error code, by database, you said, user and severity level, right? But if we, for example, have very volatile situation, I don't know, like maybe a lot of users we have, or maybe a lot of databases. So we have a lot of entries, we probably don't want them, right? For example, my first thought is maybe I don't want warnings, right? Because it's too much information, and I know I will be paying for this overhead. Maybe I want only errors, but at the same time, I know some warnings I definitely would like to see. For example, warning about glibc collation mismatch, like suggesting that maybe we have some corruption, silent corruption, and so on. These warnings I definitely would love to catch. Also, there are some errors I definitely would like to ignore. For example, uniqueness violation counter is good, but what if like we start that database and it says this very famous error message. Fatal database is starting. It's not an error
Heavy.
actually. It's just like wait a little bit, but it sees like an error and we can have spike of errors, which means that imagine we have all of that. To properly tune alerts, I probably should make some dance around filtering what I want, what I don't want, right? And maybe it should be done not later, but sooner. Maybe I should discard some messages and this could be some like filtering.
Yeah,
discuss
some
some-
filtering configuration. Yeah, make a lot of
I
sense.
just don't need these warnings, shut them down. So
Mhm.
something like this. It's maybe would make life easier because usually what I don't want is some frequent noise for me. And in this case, if we can discard it, it makes the tool more lightweight, right? So overhead lower. It's just brainstorming a little bit how I would
Yeah,
use
yeah.
it.
You can also create some filtering for a specific user you want to only to track information about a specific user, for example. Why not?
Right. But this is already later because you track all users. I can say I want only this user. There's no such filtering. Anyway, so you mentioned this cumulative statistics mechanism appeared in Postgres 18, and this is great. Postgres once again became even more extensible, right? Which is good.
Mhm.
I noticed you registered code, I don't know, 28, right? The kind of statistics.
Yeah, the kinds.
Right now, the process is very interesting. You go to wiki page and put it there, right? I know 27 was PG plans from Lucas title, right? I think now U28 also after you who came Spock PGH, right? I think 29 is Spock and then number 30 is pg.login. So we have only 4 lines right now because this is super fresh. And you were number 2 actually among these 4. That's great. I have 2 questions actually. I know there were some attempts to create such like this thing, like cumulative counters for errors. One of them was called log errors, right? And I'm just curious, what are benefits from switching? Because we use log errors in a few places. I understand the internal benefit. You use like an official way right now. And I suspect data in your extension will survive restarts, unlike log errors. This is I see easily. Because they needed to implement their own piece of shared memory and all machinery around it, right? Maybe it will survive as well if they implemented it. What else? If obviously you will take care of warnings and your granularity is better, maybe you will introduce query IDs, which will be nice, but dangerous and expensive, right? Like what else? What's the benefit?
Only aware about this extension that you are mentioning. I don't remember.
Yeah, log errors, one word without underscore.
Log errors. Okay, I found.
So it's old. I can answer for you. The main benefit will be if it goes to core or at least as contrib module, this will become packaging much easier.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And since you chose this new approach, but what are the chances? Obviously, Postgres 19 is already past beta 1, beta 2 is coming, so cannot be included in Postgres 19. Do you have plans for Postgres 20?
Yeah, for Postgres 20. For sure, next commit
year,
fest, I will be publish it for next fest.
That's great. I'm definitely willing to support with any more testing and so on. I just want this to be there because so many clusters I observe which need it. And I honestly, like when we needed to analyze performance using originally pgfwin and then pgbatch. It was pgfwin, you remember in PHP?
Yes, I remember you it a lot.
Yeah, Perl, pgbatch. And I remember guys who said, we are going to switch on logging everything for 5 minutes. It will be hard for everybody, but we need it because we need to see the whole thing. Now we have like everything. And now we have pg statements, pg sampling, pg cache, and also another approaches like active session history approach. Great. But errors, still a problem, right? And I just don't want to deal with logs like that. I want them to be a mechanism when we already understood what's happening at high level and we need examples. Then I want to go to logs. But the scale of the problem, like to triage the problem, I don't need logs.
Yeah,
Right? So
absolutely. That's a good question. I think do we have enough tools now who don't need PG Badger? Excellent.
I haven't touched it maybe 5 years. I don't need
Yeah,
it.
me neither. More than 5 years.
But in bigger companies I deal with, we usually have some already flow to process logs, either from RDS, CloudWatch, pull them, put them somewhere. So they have it, but they usually have it not because of Postgres, but for everything, right? So some log collector and analysis, Elastic, Kibana, all this, right? But I touch it less and less. And I don't need it too often. So yeah, this is, once this is there, at least as contrib module, life will become much easier when we have incidents, right? And we need to quickly understand what's happening. Michael has now.
I actually think this is more interesting, not necessarily from an incident point of view, than from an ongoing minor issues in the background type, things that would go unnoticed otherwise. I think incidents, normally somebody's on the Zoom who can access the logs and can check, does have access to those things. But I'm thinking the warnings that are building up over time that people aren't noticing, or the errors that they're affecting some users but not enough to complain about, like those kinds of things. What are this application's top 10 errors this month or this year or whatever? I think that's super interesting, even outside of incidents. Maybe it helps with incidents too, but I like the ongoing.
Inside incidents, usually it's messy, and logs, the incident produces a lot of logs. It's really hard to deal with them. And you need tooling, you need expertise. Of course, AI helps to process in large amounts. But when you have a lot of basically bytes to process, to fetch a few numbers, it's easy to make mistakes. And the LLM make mistakes when you feed too much information to it. If you have very structured counters, it's great. Also, log can rotate. You can analyze the wrong log file in the middle of rotation or something, and so on. And storing those counters in some time series, like snapshots over time, it's so much easier, so much more natural. And in general, Postgres moves in this direction. For example, we had checkpoints and auto vacuum, most data only in logs. Now it's slowly moving pgstat system. For example, finally, pgstat pgwriter, which always collected information not about pgwriter, but checkpointer and backends as well. Now it's already reorganized. Also, there is pgstat checkpointer, there is pgstat pgwriter. It's more obvious, and it's easier for LLM actually to analyze what's happening, because its naming matters a lot right now. That's why I asked pgstat log. Is it like, I wish there was specifically pgstat errors, because we have errors, what kind of, right? But I understand the reasoning, warnings and everything. I understand that. So counter efficient, the process of analysis efficient. That's important. And complete. That's also important. And fast. Yeah, you can immediately understand when exactly spike happened without grabbing.
Talking about overhead, I think the overhead introduced by this extension is way less than pgstat statement, for example.
That's interesting statement. We should maybe somehow with benchmarks think about it. Yeah, that's interesting. Why do you think so, by the way?
Because what we do in the extension, it's very simple. It's a hash.
Pgstat statements also?
Yeah, but pgstat even need to normalize the query and do a lot of other stuff.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and it takes time, CPU cycles.
I proposed introduction of query ID, right? You don't need to normalize, right?
No, I don't need to normalize.
Yeah, because in logs we also compute query ID mechanism, right? Yeah.
On the query ID front, I think one of the downsides is it would balloon the number of entries you would need. Like, you've currently got the max entries to 1024, which feels not that high, but actually, if you think about how many people actually run multiple databases on the same server and actually have like thousands of users, it's probably pretty low. Probably most people have a few users that are doing a lot of volume. And each of those things you mentioned is probably fairly low cardinality, so that by the time they all multiply, it's probably still below 1,000, which is great. But if you add query ID into that as well, that's a much bigger number.
Yes. One thinking about introducing the query ID, maybe it can be optional, a Boolean configuration that you can turn off. And then you always have the query ID. And if you don't collect query ID, it will be 0, for example.
So what's the downside of increase? If I increase max entries by a lot, I guess that's just more shared memory and slightly more delay on writing it out on restart. Are there any other downsides?
It is a hash map in memory that it will depend on how many entries on your CPU. And yes, but writing to the disk, I don't think, unless you have, and you don't
It's not a
have
lot of bytes.
good disk. Yeah, no, because I'm not writing any text field, only integers.
Right.
It's written.
True.
Very collect.
Tiny.
But regarding
That's
query
tiny.
ID, PG weight sampling also has this as optional. This parameter you can enable profiling per query, so similar approach. And I think it's even off by default. I think so, maybe I'm wrong. And we usually enable it because the information from PG weight sampling is super useful and we want it to per query ID. So yeah. Cool.
Maybe add query ID, but also bump the default way up. If there's very little overhead to having 10,000 or more, I don't see why that should be limited. What do you think?
Thanks for asking this. This was an arbitrary number that I got from my cat. Probably I should increase this and maybe match with, for example, pgstat statement, because it don't require too much memory, to be honest. Yeah.
Nice. I noticed you labeled it version 0.1. What else do you need in terms of getting it to a version you could commit to Postgres, or 1.0 or whatever, however you want to define, like production ready?
The thing that it's blocking it submit is this issue that I found in the worst case when we have all the entries filled and then new entries entering the dropping message. I will not collect information because I don't have enough capacity to collect. And this is another worst key in the corner case. And then I found that overhead it's not great. It increased by 27-30% of overhead. And actually it was not great. I think just this for now, a starting point. Maybe query ID is something to discuss with community. I don't know. There are no ongoing work in the past. There was ongoing work in the past, work in progress. Maybe it's a patch. To introduce pgstat log error or something. It was proposed by Joseph Conway, and they collected this old discussion. They collected the file name, the source code file name, the line number, where the error was coming from. That I don't think for a real use case is a good idea. I mean, for SREs, DBREs, for people that actually use it, I don't know if it's useful to know where is the C file that this error came. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that was not useful. And then I started by the basic stuff to really observe the log. A backend type, what's the database ID, what is the error level, and the SQL error code. Because I think this is the basic information really. Now that Nik mentioned, query ID can be an option.
File is always the same. It only can change after rotation, right? And
not the log file, the source code file. Sorry. The C file, something.c inside Postgres, and the line number, because we have this information.
So I see. So we have some error code, for example, my favorite X001, for example, right? I think it's some corruption or something, right? Or 002. And we know that in Postgres source code, it happens it can occur in 5 places, for example. And we want to know exact location of among of those 5, right? I think this can be useful. It reminds me like when programming, you troubleshoot with print lining, right? And you have like problem happen, test or like something. And then you think, oh, they're all the same. You need to start distinguishing them, right? You say, okay, test 1, test 2, test 3, and then which one of them fired, right? I can see it may be useful, but again, what overhead? What's the price, right?
Yeah, the price is we need to store variable sized strings because the line number is not a problem, but the file name, the source code file name, it's a string with a variable size. Then it can increase the memory a lot, depending on how many entries you store, right? But yeah, the source code file names are not very big names, but I don't remember if you have multiple file names, equal file names in different directories. I don't think so.
I think it might happen.
It might happen. So if we start only the file.c, line number 1000, and then you have 2 files the same name.
Can be compressed somehow, I think, quite easily. So to a few bytes only, but is it really needed? Maybe no. But it's a nice feature, I can imagine, like to trace the exact location. What I'm concerned about, not about like additional bytes, but it will amplify like number of entries, right? Significantly.
Yes.
If it's a common, if this error is popular and we have 100 locations, so now we have 100 like different errors basically, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's like interesting. It's interesting anyway. Yeah, we should have it in this information should be present in logs. This is verbose, detailed information. Go to logs and troubleshoot. At the level of fixed extension, we just want counters to observe holistically everything, right? And then if you identify the spike, go to logs. Now the problem is we cannot identify spikes at all. So weird. Yeah. So I agree with you. It's too verbose stuff. Yeah. Okay, it was some kind of brainstorming session, a little bit. What I think would help is if somebody starts using it, maybe not in production right away, but in some benchmarking, like I'm going to start using it in some benchmarking activities in lab environment, right? So first, like low risk. If it crashes, I will let you know. But eventually I see it in production. It should be in production. So,
it could be very useful. Nowadays, it's packaged for Debian and RPM on the PGDG repositories. So it's already available there. I can provide some Docker images, but a Docker image is very simple. You can pick a Postgres 17 and just install a new package there. PGDG is there.
Cool, but also Postgres 20 development already started, so we're already inside it. Let's go there. Let's publish it.
Yes, let's go.
Don't skip from it. I want it to be in core. This is great stuff.
Yeah, me too.
Was there anything you wanted to mention that we haven't asked about? Maybe some of the caveats that you wrote about or anything else?
One thing that everybody can potentially ask is, it requires space starts because I need to allocate shared memory. So there's no way nowadays in Postgres to do this without something. So, I think this is one of the reasons that Nik would love to have this truly in core, then we don't need to restart Postgres. But it depends on how it is implemented, right? Because there are some configurations that when we change, you need to restart anyways.
Yeah, this is exactly why I think register statements should be in core as well. We still have cases when it's not installed and it's not present in shared preload libraries, so we need a restart. So exactly.
Yeah. And this requires shared preload as well, doesn't it? Yeah.
And the only another caveat that we didn't talk about is the parallel query, right? Because there are different backend types of parallel queries. There are like normal client backend that is the leader, and then you'll be a parallel worker or something. So don't count twice in the message maybe. Yeah. So I'm not filtering anything. I just collecting on the log because it goes to the log, the information. It passed through the emit log hook. And then I capture either the leader and also the parallel workers. So if you add a monitoring tool on top and have parallel workers, maybe you should filter it out. Don't double count something. It's one caveat. It is on the readme.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I thought that was a good one to call out. And I thought the other one that was interesting for monitoring tools was the fact that database name or username could be null. And that's expected. Like some errors happen before there's a context of having a date. Like that's something I would have forgotten to do. So for example, I knew I wanted to monitor one database on Postgres. I would have filtered by that and only looked for errors, but I need that database name or null. And then I look at errors across both of those. So
Yeah,
that
exactly.
that was a really good call out, I thought. Nice one.
I didn't thought too much, but maybe another thing that is really interesting to collect and aggregate is application name.
Oh, it's Pandora box.
Yeah, I know.
There is a great idea that, well, what about client address and IP address and so on? Like, it can go far. There's a great idea that all such extensions like pgstat statements, pgstat cache, pgwait sampling, and this pgstat logs, they all must have an additional extensibility piece, so I could define my own dimensions. For example, if my query contains a comment which says this query originated from this part of application and anything, I just can tag my queries. If those tags could be extracted from comments and allow me to group by tag value inside pgstat statements or any such extension, this would be great. This is a big lacking piece. And right now, the way to go is to avoid the cumulative statistics approach completely and just use, instead of counters, just use sampling. It's basically, you can implement the same idea in active session history approach. You sample pgstat activity, you have these comments, you extract outside of Postgres, right? And then you can finally answer, okay, IO wait event, we mostly spend 90% of IO registered in wait event was in this piece of application, this part, right? Because it was tagged. In the case of your extension, same thing. If something is erroring out, group by database, group by user, even application name, it's great, but sometimes we need some custom segmentation. And now it's like it's difficult right now. This is maybe future of all those extensions to have custom tagging mechanism. Maybe these discussions. I know people and myself, like we discuss it over years. You actually, Fabrizio, is a part of some Telegram group where we discussed it, I think, a couple of times already.
Yeah.
So anyway, great. Thank you for coming. I enjoyed it. I wish all the best to this extension and all your work.
Thank you very much
and,
for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. I hope
Absolutely. And good luck for version 20. Take care. Bye.